province and did 7 consulting meetings with service providers to start with students where I did an online survey because we couldn't get them all in the same place at the same time. And administration has participated in giving us some input about what would be helpful to them in dealing with disputes. We talked to equity service offices, and we talked to the Human Rights Commission about how their process is evolving and changing, and how we might be able to fit into that so that people could get their problems resolved with PACT and not have to go to the Commission, which, as you all know, is hopelessly overloaded. And their new model is probably going to make it a little harder to get to a tribunal hearing at the end of the day anyway. So there are some benefits and some costs to the new model that the Commission is developing. So the consultation told me that we needed 3 things. We needed to consider how the service was provided, what functions we would serve, and what resources were to be developed. And the biggest thing around how service was provided is that we would be neutral, so that we're not on the student side or the institution side, that we would be independent from any interest group, which is why I got off the board of the service providers. What does this board say about that? And that it would be an informal capacity to talk to people informally. You can pick up the phone and talk to me and take it from there if you want. That it was confidential and transparent. Now, confidential and transparent, you know, is a little mutually exclusive. But in terms of transparency, we publish our mission and ethics and standards so people know how you'll be dealt with. People know what to expect when they call. People know that there will be respect for both sides of the question. So in that sense, the service is transparent and accountable, but all of the specific information that's shared obviously is confidential. Functions of the service were to prevent disputes, so getting back again to our morning theme about prevention of disputes and looking at how we can do some outreach to the primary and secondary sectors, particularly grade 12 folks who are looking at transition. Robin will tell you about that this afternoon. And looking at training, particularly new professionals, and consulting easily and getting some advocacy from outside agencies as well. We've worked with Educational Testing Service, who does the high stakes tests, the GREs, the SATs, those tests, to see how do they vet documentation, how do they accommodate, and what do we want to do like and differently from them. People have asked if we would advocate with professional licensing bodies. When you do a professional reg exam, how is that accommodated, and whether we would work with students around that. So these were some of the things that people wanted the service to do. And as I mentioned, a lot of the resources that we're developing, I'm working on a paper on human rights cases in post-secondary. What ones have been settled? What I want to do is look at making that, again, a little bit more common and maybe develop one guide that we would all rely on so faculty are getting the same messages. So we developed a website. We developed a model based on ombuds ethics, alternative dispute resolution principles. Anybody out there mediator? Certified mediator? Not yet? Okay. So the blending of those two, it was really interesting to look at what an ombuds office does, and they, again, although they would deal with any disputes, don't have the disability accommodation piece. So they wanted to use us as a resource, and I wanted to use their principles of ombudsmanship to design the model of service provision. Robin's telling me I'm running out of time, so I'll cut this off. We used Human Rights Office intake procedures, so again, a very objective, clear, confidential kind of process that shows respect for both parties. So people know if their student calls or if their institution calls, they're going to be treated fairly on both sides. And we did develop our panel of experts with psychologists because the most frequently seen documentation we need vetting is, of course, LD. We have a psychiatrist, a physiatrist to look at chronic illness and physical disabilities, and an audiologist to help us with people who are deaf or hard of hearing. And our accommodation expert is actually from New Brunswick. He's gone. Okay. So what we'd like to do is just let you know that this kind of a mediation model is out there. We've been talking to the shared solutions people so that this can be a commonly informative process between the two sectors, so that when people get mediation services through the K-12, it can look like what they would encounter in post-secondary and vice versa. Give us a try if you have parents coming into post-secondary who have questions or concerns, or just let them know that we're there. And we're hoping that that gives people an opportunity for some outside information, someone to refer people to, early mediation if it's needed, and just less tension around all this stuff and a lot more confidence. So really wanting to move towards a more proactive, collaborative, solution-focused approach rather than the intense, prolonged, and sometimes really ineffective human rights road. mean, sometimes we have to go there, but if you can solve it sooner, wouldn't that be better? And the poster about the service, the PACT project is up at the back as well, so you can peruse that at lunch. Thank you very much. Any questions? Gary?
Yeah, just a quick point. Not a question, just a comment. I want to congratulate you on an excellent checklist and the model. I think what's really important for us to keep in mind, though, is when you ask, there are 4 staff from the Ontario Human Rights Commission. They will answer 4 different, they'll give you 4 different answers. If you talk to 10 different lawyers, they're going to give you 10 different answers or 10 different interpretations. So I think the man who was talking about the definition of disability and who's eligible, I think, you know, what's really important is that you have a policy and that there is a written policy to say, okay, here's this checklist, here's the guide, don't challenge it, and don't allow people to say, well, that's not really what it means, you're not disabled enough, you know. I mean, you know, so therefore you can't have receive accommodation. I think that there's got to be a clear definition established, you know, by the Human Rights Code. I mean, the AODA, you can use that definition. I mean, it's a legal, it's legislation that probably supersedes others, so you can use that.
Any other questions? Lunch? Yes. In a modified program? Well, it depends. I'll tell you, the challenge with modified programs is that it's often not indicated on the student's OSR that the program is modified, and so their marks may be really high and they may get in, but then they encounter the difficulty of what the expectations in post-secondary are. And a post-secondary curriculum is not modified, no. So, well, it's modified in the way that you do it. So you can do it with extra time, you can do it with dictation, you can do it with a scribe, you can do it with software, but you got to do it. So you're not going to find in post-secondary faculty members saying, you know, given your disability, you can write a 5-page essay while everyone else writes a 25-page essay. Not going to happen. So it's more about finding the way that you're going to meet the requirements than changing the requirements. It's a different game. But there's also so much more range in what kind of program you choose to go into that students usually choose according to their strengths. They choose something that they know they're going to be good at. And then when they get into the program, the disability piece that needs to be changed so they can do that program that they're capable of doing, then they do. But, you know, if you're in a university program that's aiming you for medical school, they're not going to change the requirements. And you wouldn't want a doctor whose requirements had been changed either. Okay. Any other questions? Thank you, Bob.